The last we talked about this mysterious refugee, the survivor, the Palit, who came to tell Avram HaIvri that his nephew had been taken. That is Perek Yudal, chapter 14, verse 13 and verse 14. And we learned that Avram heard that his brother had been taken captive. One of the things that I'm trying to do with this series, we're learning together Chumash Breisheet in depth, not as a Parsha Shavua class, but really trying to understand the deeper layers of meaning by focusing on a particular Parsha. You can see that unlike, let's say, in the world of halacha, where we need to come to a bottom line, practically, what should people do? They can follow this opinion, that opinion, but once we come to a consensus, okay, now this is the halacha, the way that we go. In the world of Agadah, it's much more expansive. There isn't a practical ramification per se, and our understanding of what's happening in the storyline may actually be able to accommodate multiple, sometimes conflicting points of view about what it is the Torah is trying to communicate. And this is a great example right here. It describes Lot as the brother of Avraham. And we learned previously, I know I'm doubling back, but there's a method to the madness here. The idea that, and we saw it elsewhere in Sefer Breisheet even, that in the kiln of crisis, fraternity is either born or reinforced. The idea that the people who would have other types of relationships, I gave you the example at the end of Parshat Vayetze, it mentions that Yaakov and his brothers sat to eat bread. And of course, begs the question, he doesn't have brothers. He has one brother who he doesn't get along with, who the next Parsha, after the story of Parshat Vayetze, Parshat Vayishlach, is where he's going to have his meeting, his fateful meeting, interaction, and reconciliation with Esav. So who are the brothers? And of course, Rashi, there are quotes from Chazal, that his own children became like his brothers. In the moment of the kiln of crisis is forged another type of relationship, where the relationship becomes one of a commiseration that begets co-fraternity. Here, I applied it the same way. Okay, Lot was really his nephew, but he was his comrade, and he was, in this sense, one of his brethren. It's like we say, Achenu kol beit Yisrael. We don't literally mean every single person is literally your brother and your sister. Literally? No, it means in a general sense. But in that moment, Achenu kol beit Yisrael hatunim b'tzara u'b'shivya, goes the prayer. In a time of distress, and even perhaps in captivity. Okay, that's where we bring to the foreground the notion of brotherhood. What I wanted to add to this, though, this morning, which is really just a fascinating idea, and it's two ideas I want you to hold in hand at the same time. They seem to be, on the face of it, mutually exclusive. On the one side, we learn, according to some of the Rishonim, Rabbeinu Bachaya in particular, that this shows the greatness of Avram Avinu. Here, Lot was, I would use the word here just because it sums it up, he was in a certain way, he was a ne'er-do-well. I mean, here, or an ingrate. They had this relationship. Avram Avinu was the adopted father of Lot. And what's the thanks that he gets? In chapter 13, one chapter ago, we learned that there was quarreling in the family. And not just quarreling, but, I mean, again, to take Rashi based on Chazal on that view, Avram's shepherds are hearing Lot's shepherds say derisive things about Avram Avinu. He's an old mule, he's never going to have children, everyone knows Lot's going to inherit him, therefore, ergo, Lot should be able to inherit him now, therefore the promises given to Avram Avinu are the promises given to Lot and to Avram Avinu's estate, and that means we can take whatever grazing land we want, and it's of no moment that there's a moral dimension of something that is not functioning as it should, right? So we don't care about any of that. What greatness we learn about Avram Avinu, that notwithstanding the fact that Avram Avinu himself was maybe disappointed in his nephew, and that he recognized that his nephew was, shall we say, not going to be, by any stretch of the imagination, the inheritor of Avram Avinu's legacy, nonetheless, look at Avram Avinu's greatness, that he saw in his nephew Lot a kindred spirit, even though his nephew had totally disappointed him, and even though his nephew had decided not to go forward with his the same sense of a moral rectitude that Avram Avinu was characterized by. That's on one side.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
what about do any of the commentators say anything about the fact that Lot was quiet about Sarah being Abraham's wife in Egypt, and that in a sense, I don't want to use the word quid pro quo, but family life was different then. A
Right.
nephew, I mean, what's his face? Yitro remember when he first comes up, he's Reuel, and
Yes.
is Reuel another name for Yitro, or is it the grandfather?
Right.
We don't
Right.
understand these extended clan kind of things because we don't have them nowadays.
Fair enough. Yes, the answer is yes. Not necessarily in terms of quid pro quo vis-a-vis what Lot did not say in Egypt, but along those lines, the Ramban writes that here Avram Avinu took Lot from Haran. Had Avram Avinu not taken Lot in the first place, Lot wouldn't be in this mess. Avram Avinu feels a certain sense of responsibility for his nephew by dint of the fact that he had taken him out of his milieu. Lot wasn't obligated to come, but it sounds as if, the way the Ramban makes it sound, that Lot engaged in an act of chesed to go with Avram Avinu. And Avram Avinu encouraged this. Now Avram, you could say, owed him back. You could say it. You could say that he doesn't connect it to my recollection specifically what happened in Egypt, but he does connect it to something about, as you say, the clan or something like that. So we have the possibility that it's the greatness of Avram Avinu because he recognized his nephew was not going to rise to greatness, and yet he wanted to have a rapport with his nephew, and therefore he wanted to save his nephew. Number one, that's the Rabbin B'chai. Number two, now that you said it, we'll put it in the middle, as the Ramban. They had a rapport. Lot had done some kind of act of chesed, if you will, coming along in the unknown journey with Avram and Sarah into Eretz Canaan, and Avram felt a certain kinship. That's the Ramban. Says the Rambam, you know why Avram saved his nephew Lot? Because he realized that his nephew Lot was a common believer in the same ideals of monotheism that he was. And he saw this moment as an assault, not only on someone who happened to be in his family, but someone who was his brother in belief. So, wait a second. Is it correct to say, as Rabbeinu B'chai says, that really Avram, notwithstanding the great disappointment he held with regard to his nephew, he still saved him? Is it, like you were saying, Shelley, along the lines of the Ramban, there's a clan, there's a relationship that someone either owed someone or whatever it is, sense of chesed, or is it on the other side of it, Avram heard that his brother in arms, from a belief perspective, was taken captive, and he went after. That's the Rambam in the Moreh Nevuchim. So, which of these is correct? So, a person who thinks more concretely, or who views Agada in the same vein as they view the world of halacha, I believe this is a mistake to put them both together. That's why the separate magisteria, they function differently. It's not that one doesn't inform the other, but let's just say in Agada, you can say, well, this one might be right, this one might be right, this one might be right. On a certain level, they all might be right. And sometimes even when they're mutually exclusive, it doesn't mean that the holding of the one means the rejection wholesale of the other. Now, this is something that Chazal were already doing. This is already in the Medrash. This is already how Midrashim. Now, the Rambam writes about this in Akdamah Parashim Mishnayot. Some people are very concrete. They see a Medrash. They say it's exactly the historical reality. It's exactly the psak of Chazal. This is what happened. The Rambam says, look 3 lines later. So often a Medrash has another Medrash that conflicts with it. So you have people trying to always reconcile. All the Midrashim all work out. They all happened exactly. That's not the point. There's a certain inherent malleability within. It's not an infinite malleability. There's Shivim Panim LaTorah, 70 facets to the Torah. But there is within the realm of understanding of Chumash, the basic understanding of stories, there is right there an open a window that through, or a series of windows through which we can look through, right? It's the prism which the light of the Torah is refracted each time. And I'll give you another example of this that, you see an example of in different times, different Parshanei HaMikra come up with new ideas. One of the more recent Parshanei HaMikra, I'll call him actually a commentator on the Torah, which I'm defining as someone who went systematically from the beginning of Breisheet to the end of, call it Dvarim, I'll stop there, but maybe even went further, who wrote something that was a linear commentary, even if they didn't comment on every single line of the Chumash. The point is, they were interested in a systematic understanding, which was not first driven by homiletics in the sense of a drasha, but driven first by concerns of the text of the Torah itself. Like, what is the Torah itself communicating on its own terms, irrespective of what's going on in the world around me? So the last person, one of the last people, is the Emet Liakov, Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky, Zechat Tzaddik Kodesh Livracha. He was alive in the 20th century. He's one of the later Achronim. He has a fascinating comment. Some of his book, the truth is, was written up posthumously by his students. Some of them were taken from drushes, and some of them were really his notes on having gone through Chumash, trying to understand various elements. Now, as it happens, even though I just gave you that whole introduction about Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky, one of the great Gedolei Torah of the 20th century, this particular piece I want to share with you, actually, the notes say this is from the notes of students when he gave a public lecture once. Not once, but one of his public lectures. So I don't know that I would necessarily put this comment per se in the basket with all the other comments in the book necessarily. I thought this was particularly a pointed sort of rejoinder to what I just presented. Rabbi Bachai on one side, Rambam on the other. You can maybe put the Ramban in the middle of that. He writes as follows. If Avram Avinu had asked a Shaila, if he had gone, who was he going to go to? But let's say hypothetically, he has sort of wanted to consult. Can I put my life in danger in order to save someone else? Right? That you could say is a contemporary question. Can a person put themselves in a suffix sakana in order to save someone else? So you're putting yourself in danger. The answer probably would have been he's patur. On the line of halacha, he was not really obligated to do this. He hadn't signed some kind of a blood oath that he had to do it, and it's not clear they would have to do that. Well, what did Avram Avinu do here? Says Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky. He acted in the manner of the way that the Gemara describes the patriarchs, Yesharim, upright people. They were people who exuded the attributes of Yashrut. Yashrut, we would translate into our colloquial speech as Menschlichkeit. No? In fact, it's exactly how Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky translates it. Lachein al pi hayoysher, Menschlichkeit. He actually writes that. Chuchrach Avraham. Avram was compelled. On that score, it's true through Dinei Torah. If you looked strictly within the halacha, he didn't have to get up and take care of his nephew, but he felt responsible for Lot. Why? Now here, this is different than what the Ramban said. I don't want to hear it clearly, and maybe it's a little bit of me this resonating for me because of what we have, what's coming tonight and tomorrow with Yom HaShoah. He said he felt responsible for Lot's welfare. Mikevan sheharan aviv meit bekivshan aviv, because Haran, his father, had died in the kiln of his father. Mishum she'amar shumayin belokei Avram. Who was the first person who was martyred, who was burned, because they said they believe in one God who does not have a body or a form, etc.? It was Haran. And Haran's whole faith, though sometimes we view it in a pejorative sense that he made some kind of a Pascal's wager almost. You know, he kind of said when he was asked, do you believe or do you not believe? The Rashi there quotes from Chazal, he reasoned, if Avram Avinu will be saved in a fiery furnace, then I'll turn around and I'll say, I'm with Avram. If Avram Avinu is incinerated, I'll say, I'm with Terach, I'm with my father. But the fact that Avram Avinu was saved encouraged and inspired Haran to say, I believe in the God of Avram. That language. So his relationship to God was through Avram Avinu. Again, not because he had deified Avram, but the point of my relationship to Hashem is through, like we say in our David, so that was his declaration. And what happened next? He got killed. Avram Avinu lives with survivor's guilt. My nephew would not be an orphan, but for the reality that my brother was killed. It was his choice. He could have just said, I'm with Terach, but he said, I'm with Avram, not just Avram, Lekei Avraham. And therefore, Avinu thought the menschlich thing to do was to take care of his nephew. And therefore, he had to train his students, his charges, and to run after the kings. Ube'emet, writes Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky, Kol Chayei Avot, all of the lives of the patriarchs, Shechayu Kodem Zman Torah, they lived before the Torah was ever given, after all, Hayu Munhagim Al Pi HaYosher. They lived by a sense of the upright, the righteous thing to do. And that's what it means, Derech Eretz Kadma Torah. And our sages teach that the Derech Eretz, which sometimes is understood as the way of the world in the manner of getting a job, livelihood, living in the world, comes before learning. That's not how Chazal understood it in this context, in Vayikra Rabbah, how it's quoted here in the Emet Liakov. It meant rather that before there was a Torah, there was still Derech Eretz and Yosher. And that's how they function. V'hainu shavud hitnagu al pi Derech Eretz v'Yosher od kodem shnitna Torah. He has other ideas that he explains this with. He also quotes the Gemara in Masechet Avodah Zarah that Sefer Breisheet, says the Gemara based on a pasuk in Sefer Yeshua. Sefer Breisheet is called the Sefer HaYashar. It's the story book of people who acted in an upright way. And when they fell down, take the brothers of Yosef or something. So it was ultimately a redemptive story about how Yashrut won out. Who did this also? We learned it moons ago, maybe 2 years ago, when our Parshat Shana was the Netziv of Volozhin. We learned then that it was the Netziv's introduction to his commentary on the Torah. This is his introduction, that the Avot and the Imahot lived lives of being people who are Yesharim, people who are upright, which he doesn't use the word menschlichkeit as Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky does, but same idea. Last piece about this, and here is where you see also a little bit of the admixture of Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky as a darshan and Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky as a parshan. He says when you open the first Rashi on Chumash, Rashi asks, quoting from this Rabbi Yitzchak, the question of why did the Torah not start with mitzvot? Why did it start with the stories of the patriarchs and the matriarchs? Excuse me, why did it start with the story of creation? Sorry. And the answer that Rashi there quotes is based on this idea of a pasuk in Sefer Tehillim, Koach Ma'asav V'Yid La'amo. Hashem wanted to show the power of his actions to his nation. And this is understood as God gave the land, Latet Lam Nachlat Goyim, to give them the heritage of the nations. He created the world and gave it to the one who he wanted to give it to. Meaning Hashem controls all. Hashem created the world. And therefore, if the Jewish people deserve having the land of Israel, they'll get it. If they don't have to deserve having the land of Israel, someone else will get it. That's the idea. But says Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky, okay, that Rashi explains why the story of creation is in there. But Rashi there fails to explain why the story of the matriarchs and the patriarchs is in there. Tell me instead, all those stories in Midrashim, let the Torah start with God created the world, etc. And after that, you can tell me the story of mitzvahs. And all the stories about the Jewish people before the Jewish people ever arrived as a people in the land of Israel can all be in the world of Midrash. They don't have to be in the Torah Shebichtav. Right? Because that was not an answer that was given by Rashi. But according to what I'm explaining, says Rabbi Kamenetsky, all these parts should all make sense. Instead of Hashem legislating, here are the mores that all of humanity should be following in an overt sense. Here are the mitzvahs for the whole world. What did he do instead? He told stories of paragons of moral virtue. People who, through their lives, lived the lives of Derech Eretz and thereby put the entire world on notice. Anyone, man or woman, old or young, anyone who was of the family of Avram and Sarah, or anyone who was not, all they had to do was make a choice to live a life of Yosher, a life filled with menschlichkeit. Therefore,
Rabbi,
Kamenetsky, the entire book is itself teaching us this point, not through legislation, but through moral exemplars of the values, of divine values. And here you have it on display in the saving. Avram Avinu saving his nephew, even though by rights, according to pure halacha, you can make a whole case that it's a suffix sakana, and he's not a warrior, and he can't do it, and he does not obligate it. Nonetheless, what did he do? He stepped into the breach because it was the right thing to do. It was menschlichkeit. Okay, let me take
And
some
Rabbi, and I'm sure I'm probably also like you thinking of what's coming tonight, but I can't help but add, and I think any child of a survivor would probably agree with me, that of the many things we lost when we lost the European community, the European Jewish community, we lost people that lived their lives exactly that way.
Yeah.
Rabbi,
I would venture to say that we certainly feel that way, and many of us live that way, but that doesn't absolve us of our responsibility to try to get there.
I agree with that too.
It holds us to account, but it does,
Exactly.
but this is the reality, right? This is the reality.
Rabbi?
it's Helen. Could you hear me?
Hi, Helen. Helen and then Shelley.
Okay.
Go. Listening.
Okay.
Hi.
Okay. I always try to guide myself. Hishtadel lios ish bikom she'ein ish. And I tell myself that every couple, I'll bring this to my own life. There are people who are friends and relatives who disappoint, who say critical things, who say nourisher things, and you're very angry inside. But you say, I'm not going to answer back. You're going to hold your tongue. And inside, when you get off the phone, you're angry and you want to tell them off, but you schweig. Later on, you say to yourself, thank God I held my tongue because I had a good working relationship about important things afterward. And so when you say to yourself, oy, nourish your cup, and you keep quiet, but you come to the aid or they come to your aid later on. So in telling yourself, hishtadel lios ish binkom she'ein ish, is reflected on Abraham's thought about Lot.
Excellent. Thank you. Beautiful.
Rabbi?
Thank you.
A
Yeah.
couple of weeks ago, you talked about, I don't remember if it was Rav Soloveitchik or what, the idea that actually Lot was very much influenced by Abraham and was really into Kiruv. How does that fit in with all of this stuff? I mean, it's so
Again,
hard to get
that's
the
right.
lesson.
So you can't reconcile that necessarily with Rabbeinu Bechaye.
Right.
But you can reconcile with the Rambam. Here, Avram Avinu saw that this is my brother in belief. So therefore, how can I abandon him? He's the face of Kiruv. They didn't just come for him because he's a guy. They came, the four kings, they came for him specifically because they know what he represents. How can I let that go by the wayside?
Are we a lot like Lot in the sense that we're very imperfect? We have certain good stuff and we have certain bad stuff. And the whole story of Lot is, it almost seems incredible how you could, you save the strangers later on, but you offer up your daughters. But in a sense, we're not saints. Maybe we aren't as good as the Avot and the Imahot. Maybe we're more like Lot. We try sometimes to do the right thing, but we mess up.
Fine. I hope we are not like Lot. I have no doubt that the story is not just told to us as a caricature, but Lot was a real person with real failings, real issues. I'll invoke someone else's name now. There are many parallels between the two people. And I will venture to say that our life experience at this moment, I've said this a few times now, but I really keep thinking about it, is now going to change for the foreseeable future. I would venture to say for generations to come. I'll go out on a limb. Our view of the great tzaddik, Noah. Noah, who had a global crisis that he had to deal with. Noah, who had tremendous sense of burden, of responsibility. Noah, who was shut in and confined for an extended period of time, lo aleinu. with very few people. Maybe in a certain sense he was alone, even though physically there were other people with him. If you know some of the Midrashim, the Gemaras about some of the sense of solitude therein. And Noah, who did not see the light of day for a year, essentially a year, and who dealt with great uncertainty. And every kid in grade school, pretty much, I think, knows that the reason why we refer to Noah, there was a tzaddik b'dorotav, is either because, this is like another good example, either because look how amazing Noah was, that notwithstanding all the terrible influences that could have impacted him negatively, nonetheless, he was a great tzaddik. How amazing was he? Or, relatively speaking, in his generation, the bar was low enough that he was a great tzaddik for not doing the terrible things that they did. But compare him to Avram Avinu, he didn't really rank. I think, that's my feeling, it's better a feeling than a thinking. I feel at this moment that people who have gone through this time period, are going through this time period now, are not going to be able to come back to a Parshat Noach and look at Noach with any kind of, be more challenging to see that side of the argument that B'dor Tav means, he wasn't such a great guy. You know, look what he put up with, look what he had to deal with, look what he had to suffer. So I think you can apply that here also with Lot. Like, are we sometimes like Lot? Yeah, sometimes some of us are like Lot. Are we always like Lot? Well, we aspire to be like Avram and Sarah. We're descended of them. So we reach for, instead of our better angels, we'll say we reach for our better biblical characters, which we don't have to reach for because we are, halachically speaking, all of us, part and parcel. Gam v'gam, those who are born Jewish, those who join the Jewish people, we're the children of Avram and Sarah Imenu. We have it in our spiritual genetic makeup that we are people filled with kindness and people filled with hospitality and with righteousness and yashrut. Does that mean nobody strays and makes mistakes and does the wrong thing? No, but yeah.
Mashiach comes from two generations. Mashiach comes from two descendants of Lot. Now,
Right.
we're not supposed to marry Canaanite people because they do immorality. Well, Lot with his daughters doesn't sound all that great either.
Right. You're taking us now into chapter 19. I'm going to go back to 14 because now we're focused too much on Lot. But yeah, bookmark that when we get to chapter 19, the destruction of Sodom. We'll talk about that episode a little more in depth. Let's ground ourselves back here, if I can. Let's draw us back to this conversation in Perek Yud. You're absolutely right, Shelley, by the way. We got to get there. We're not up to chapter 19. At the rate we're going, we won't be there for a good few years, which is good. Again, we're doing deep sea diving here. We're not interested in going for a wave runner excursion. When we look at the idea that Avram Avinu took these people with him, these special 318 people, we learned some very interesting things. I'm at verse 14 still. We haven't really gone much more than this pasuk, even though I did verse 15 at the end last time we learned because it was related to Pesach. The second half of that pasuk, he prepares his charges. Chanichav is those people who he had inaugurated or dedicated in some way, like Hanukkah or the word chinuch. So if you look at Rashi here, Chanichav, Chanacho Ketiv. If you look in the way it is taught to us, we see it as really Chanacho. He dedicated him in some way. What does it mean that he dedicated him? So Rashi explains, Ze Eliezer. This refers to Eliezer, who was a member of his household and who was known to be someone who he could educate in the world of mitzvot. Recall, he does not have a son yet. He doesn't have even a Yishmael. So this is who he has. So Vayarget Chanichav, that's Eliezer. V'ulashnat chalat knisat ha'adam uklila umanut shu'atid la'amod ba. This is a well-trodden path, this Rashi. This Rashi appears in many different places in Sifrei Kodesh that deal with education. always bring out this Rashi as something to analyze and to think about. Eliezer was inaugurated or dedicated in the world of mitzvot. What does the word chinuch mean? It means to begin to enter a person or a vessel to a craft that they are ultimately going to need to accomplish. We would say in English in one word, an apprenticeship. Education is apprenticeship. Now, what's the difference between apprenticeship versus classroom learning? Should be obvious. For classroom learning, you need books, maybe a nice video. For apprenticeship, you need a personality. And that's what chinuch is. V'chein chanoch lanar, it says in the book of Proverbs, instruct the child, but it's not so much instruct as inauguration by practice. Do it, and we'll do it together, and you'll learn. And that's what the words at the end of Parshat Naso refer to, Chanukat HaMizbeach. And that's what the words mean in the 30th chapter of Tehillim, Chanukat Habayit, the dedication of the house. These things do not mean the putting up of the house or the putting up of the Mizbeach. It doesn't mean the putting up of or the holding up of the child. It means the actually inaugurating and dedicating by doing. Uvilaz v'lashon amzar, korin lo, we read it as enseigner. That's from the Old French, and actually in this case, it's how it is spoken in French today. Enseignement refers to education. Enseigner is to teach. But the point here is that in antiquity, certainly, and even in the Middle Ages, enseigner did not mean a classroom instruction as much as an apprenticeship. And that's what Rashi is driving at. And we learn a crucial lesson here about chinuch and Chanukah as times of and opportunities for doing and for teaching by modeling, davka by modeling. So it stands to reason that the Avram Avinu who modeled Yashua, we saw in the Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky, he therefore models for those who are in his house. He is mechanechem in mitzvot. And that's what's happening here. And so of all the people in his household, he has chiefly the people who were in his house, who were raised up in his house. By the way, not everyone agrees that it's referring necessarily to one person, but rather it's referring to many people. The Abarbanel thinks it is the hired hands that are the people who are helping out in his household, maybe his shepherds or what have you. So they're the people. So they were taught by him. Those are chanichav, and that's separate and distinct from Yelidei Veito, the servants who grew up in his household. According to Reb Sadia Gaon, chanichav refers to Yedidav, his close friends. These were people who were in some way his buddies, his comrades. He went together with them. It could be also that it means the people who were somech on his shulchan. Again, Rabbeinu Bechaya here. It's people who were on his table, meaning they were fed by him. Maybe they owed him kindnesses. It's not clear. We'll find out later that they were paid in some way for their time, which I want to underscore does not necessarily mean that they were mercenaries. It could be that they're not mercenaries. They had a certain, mercenaries to me always conjures the image of like, guys are hired guns. They don't have any fealty towards the cause, but not necessarily so. It could be some admixture, that these were people who were in his household. They were the servants that had grown up in his household. They all been educated in this way. Nonetheless, they needed to be paid. If they weren't getting paid for being shepherds and for being people who worked on the estate, so they had to be people who were out in the battlefield. So that's what Avram said, from the spoils of war, I want them to be paid. That's what he's going to tell the king of Sodom. What is Eliezer doing in here? Everybody knows the next Rashi. It's a very beautiful idea. Rabbeinu Amru, Eliezer, based on the Gemara, Eliezer levadohaya v'umin gematria shel shmo. It says that there were 318 people in total with Avram Avinu. The gematria of the word Eliezer is 318. So that gives us an opportunity to talk for a few minutes about gematria, which is much maligned and oftentimes easily and handily dismissed because of the reality that anyone could take any word, transfer it into its numerical value, and then conjure up some other word that they pull from the sky that happens to have the same numerical value and say, presto, look at that, you know, and they kind of make a game of it. I did have a teacher who once asked tongue-in-cheek, you know, when you ask yourself about gematria, you ask yourself, I think I was still a high school student. He said, do you have a need to play? I said, he asked the students, do you have a need to play? Need to play? Chazal had a need to play. And so the way that they played in the world of gematria. I'm not sure I fully understand what that teacher was driving at. I have great respect for this person, but I always sort of bristled at it because I don't believe that it's a game. It could be a game, but anything could be reduced to being called a game without any inherent significance. Let's try to understand a little bit deeper. Maybe I'll throw it out to the to those of us on the call today. Why did Chazal want us to know that even though Eliezer's name's not mentioned, and it says the number 318, you know, wink, wink, nod, nod, was that all it was that Rashi is quoting from the Gemara? Chazal want us to know the gematria of Eliezer is 318, and we should know the only person who accompanied Avram Binu is one person. He went with Eliezer. Let me say it differently. What would it mean if the only people who went out to the battlefield was strictly Avram Avinu and one person named Eliezer? What would it mean about the war that he prosecuted?
Miracle.
Even more miraculous. By the way, it's certainly incredibly miraculous already to claim that there's exactly 318 people with Avram. It's not even, what is it? It's not a battalion. It's not a brigade. It's very few people, relatively speaking, went after these four armies that had just finished conquering 5 other chieftains. That's already a huge miracle, but this makes it even more of a miracle, right? So that's one layer. What else?
It shows what Eliezer was willing to do for him. How he depended on Eliezer, how Eliezer was
right,
so devoted to him, and by extension, you'd think, to God. Right. And then, of course, that makes it much harder later on when Abraham does not want Eliezer to be his heir. I mean, Eliyahu has Elisha as his heir instead of a blood relative.
So I'm gonna harp on that point right there. Eliezer's name has not been mentioned in the Torah at all yet. He's coming. But Chazal want you to know Eliezer's already in the picture over here. And where did he not only cut his teeth, but where did he already make his mark, Eliezer? He was in the background as the aide de camp of Avram Avinu. I'll give you an example. Yonatan ben Uziel, the great Yonatan ben Uziel, who wrote a commentary on the Torah also, the Targum Yonatan. He says that what Chazal mean here is, he was one of Chazal, by the way, he's from that generation. He's a Tana. He says that in his mightiness, his strength was as against the 318 people. That's how strong he was. And that's what it actually means, right? By the way, right away, the Ibn Ezra jumped on Rashi and said, this is what they call derech drash. It's a very nice idea, but I mean, you know, I can't really accept it. The Torah does not speak in the language of gematria. It speaks in the language of words. Because, as the Ibn Ezra himself writes, you can make any name, any word, any noun, be for the good or for the bad. You do what you want with it. It's putty in the hands of whoever has the gematria. But rather, the name is what the name is, meaning Eliezer is the name of this person. He exists where he exists. He's written up in the Torah. It's in chapter 15. But here it says 318. Why didn't it say Eliezer's name? Because there were 318 people there, right? Now, the question is, I'm trying to stay within the world of Rashi, but we should understand, yeah, there were already Parshanei Mikra said, come on, you know. The Radak, for instance, said, you know, I have another problem. How are you going to explain Yili de Beito? Clearly, Eliezer is going to be described as Eliezer of Damascus. He wasn't born in the house. So how can it be the charges who are those who were born in the house? And by the way, it just means Eliezer. Radak said it's obviously not Pshat. But Yonatan ben Uziel said, no, it means he had great strength. That's what it refers to, right? The Rabbeinu Bechaya here also, he said, Avram went with 318. But as they went along on the journey, he said to them, anyone who has sins, you're going to be under the microscope, so to speak, by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So you're not going to be able to withstand the battle if you have sins. Turn back. So over time, they kept leaving through the night. He, in the end, was left with one person by the time it got to the end. Yeah, maybe pshat, maybe not pshat. The Rebbeinu B'chai didn't make up this idea. It's in Parshat Shoftim. This is what happens when the Shoftim themselves, the Shotrim rather, say to the Jewish people going out to the battlefield, if you do not feel you are worthy, i.e. you are concerned about your sins, so turn back from the battlefield now, but don't go out on the battlefield and endanger yourself otherwise. There is the idea here, perhaps, that the notion of Eliezer, whose very name, I mean, if he's a man from Damascus, what a strange name he had. Eliezer, my God helps, was his name. Was that his given name? Or was that at the moment Avram Avinu declared, Vikarei Shemo Beveti, his name shall be, according to Lashon HaKodesh, by the Hebrew language, he'll have the name Eliezer. And perhaps one could argue that the 318 number, again, it's not even a round number. Why did Avram Avinu come up with that number? You can say very simply, that's how many people he had. What are you asking? That's what it says in the Torah. That's how many he had. Or alternatively, there's something about that number that's meant to remind us about Eliezer, that from all of the different people in the household, who was the shining star from a moral perspective, more than anyone else, it was Eliezer himself. Yeah. And another layer of meaning is in the realm of numbers, of the numbers of numerological considerations. I'll add here parenthetically 2 points. One, 7 or 8 or 9 years ago, I did like a series called Entering the Orchard, where we tried to each week focus on another type of commentary or layer of understanding. So we did like the Pardes, Pshat, Remez, Drash, Sod. I think it did Pshat, Drash, Remez, and Sod I don't think I ever got to, because I realized I want to open that box. But in terms of the world of Remez, it's certainly a layer of understanding and of meaning. And there's much to be said about it, much more we have time for today because we're basically out of time. Number two, we live much more in the world of numbers than any generation before us. Much more in the world of numbers. Our world is, and the very image that you're looking at of me and me of you, is populated by zeros and ones. Millions of them, billions of them. There's binary codes. We live by numbers. There was a time before time, not so long ago, a time of the Renaissance, before which quantification did not exist to the extent that it does now. The world of measuring things did not exist as it does now. Just think about even in the world of halacha. You have a kizayit, it's of the size of an olive, and a kibetza, the size approximately of an egg, and an amma, which is this amount, and a tefach, which is either this amount or this amount. Closed fist, open fist, the fingers extended, with some kind of variations and discussions. These were all connected to the human body or to sensory experience around, or the distance of a meal, which itself was understood as how far a human being could walk in a certain span of time, and so on and so forth. We live in a much more quantified world than people did not so long ago. Apparently, there were tribes. This from Jonathan Haidt in his book Righteous Mind that I've referenced now. I guess ring the bell, so probably 150 times now over the last couple of years. But in that book, he talks about, I believe it's in that book, where he talks about different cultures, in more primitive cultures, where they don't actually have numbers beyond 3. They count 1, 2, 3, many. After that, just many. They don't actually have language for any numbers beyond it. That's not us, obviously. But the idea that Chazal are already trying to teach us that by the by, there's another layer of meaning, and it has to do with numerological significance, not because it can't be abused any more than you can look at the words and translate them in misshapen ways in your own sense. I mean, words you could do that with as well, yeah? But numbers are even more malleable, you could say, maybe even more fungible, if you could borrow the terminology. And here, Rashi wants us to know that according to Chazal, this was Eliezer. I could see 2 perfect Jews. One Jew who thinks Avram Avinu went literally with one other person, and 2 people fought valiantly and overtook 4 armies. or a person who says, no, it doesn't literally mean that. It means that he took the 318. That's a big enough miracle in and of itself. And at the same time, that among them, there was one who was going to be distinguished such that by the time we get to the next chapter, Avram Avinu will be asking, who will inherit me, Hashem? It seems to be, it's going to be Damasek Eliezer of Damascus, whose name had not been mentioned in the battlefield, but who afterward was clearly the front runner among the students and the quote unquote children, I mean here spiritual children of Avram Avinu, to be the inheritor of his legacy. You follow? But the point is that he's already distinguished in a subtle way. Eliezer is already mentioned before he's mentioned as the only or one of the main or a face among 318, but one who would shortly distinguish himself as a shining light among them with his beautiful name that Avram Avinu perhaps himself gave him, who knows, or he gave himself, Eliezer. Hashem is my help. Any other questions, comments, or thoughts? Feel free to chime in.
Usually numbers are rounded up, aren't they? And they have a certain significance.
Right.
740,
Right.
Whatever.
Right.
So are there other examples of when, if this 318 means 318 men,
Yeah.
are there other examples of something being that precise?
Sure. The census.
Okay.
Beginning of Sefer Bamidbar and in Parshat Pinchas. The census.
Okay.
But your point is well taken. The fact of the specificity of 318, to me, yeah, viscerally speaking, not disputing other commentaries, but why was it 318? Because that's how many people it was, right? That's how many people it
But
was.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
don't we have that David stands up against Goliath in the same way
Right.
that Goliath is so powerful,
Fine.
and yet David, as a singular person, can figure out how to overcome him.
Right. Right.
And then, of course, in my Goyish world, Odysseus in the Odyssey is copying from the story of Lot, of Abraham and Eliezer, that a shining hero can overcome all kinds of cyclops and all kinds of enemies of all
Challenges and all that.
kinds.
Yeah. So join me next week when we'll be talking about the actual, the battle is like one pasuk. It's the next pasuk. We had already learned it, and exactly along those lines, Helen, is to try to parse, what's the reaction of an Avram Avinu and of the rest of the world to his miraculous victory against all odds. Avram Avinu will frame it in a certain way, which will not be the way that the other observers, particularly the king of Sodom, will frame the victory. And in that will be a great difference, and that'll be our shiur next Monday, God willing, in advance of Yom HaAtzmaut. So it'll be the Yom HaAtzmaut shiur. We just happen to be up to this, and I think it's germane. Okay, that's all we have time for today. Thank you so much for joining. If you're interested in joining tomorrow's class at 9 a.m., it's a soul of the sitter. We'll be learning another tefillah, and there's a whole schedule I sent out already for other shiurim that are going on with Rabbi Sprung, myself, throughout the week. And join us, please, tonight at 8 p.m. for the Yom HaShoah virtual gathering. We'll be lighting some candles, have some survivors and some children survivors lighting some candles. I'll say a few words, and should be, relatively speaking, a brief service, the wrong word, program rather, tonight. That's at 8 p.m. Wishing everyone a great day. Take care.